Hello, friends. My name is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the Audiophiliac. And I've had this idea kicking around for a long time. What if it wasn't the Beatles that broke up in 1970, but the Rolling Stones? The Rolling Stones had a huge row. They broke up in 1970. They went on to make solo records that didn't really go anyplace, and they were over. But the Beatles stayed together, and they were all alive in 2018. So I'm looking at this make-believe history, and I'm thinking, you know, their actual solo records in the early 70s were kind of like Beatle albums. Certainly McCartney's first one, McCartney and Ram, they were very Beatlesque, and George's record, you know, certainly All Things Must Pass sounded like a Beatles album. It actually had Ringo on it. You know, they kind of were coasting. So, but in my fantasy, they were making those records, but they were making them together as a foursome, as the complete Beatles. And because they stayed together, their creativity, the sum was greater than the parts, that they would have made better albums. They would have made better McCartney's solo records, the Ram and they would have been better if the other three had been involved. I think they worked off each other better. That's clearly true. You could look back and see that the Beatles albums had a much higher quality level than any of the Beatles solo albums. So I think they probably would have continued to make really amazing albums well into the 1970s, maybe into the 80s. And yeah, like the Rolling Stones in real life, that Tattoo You, which came out in 1981, was, I think, their last good record creatively. I'm not saying ones that were popular or sold or had a song or two on them. I'm talking about as a whole work. For the Stones, I think Tattoo You was their last great record. And that was a freaking long time ago. And they've been touring and playing songs from the 60s and 70s forever. But in my fantasy, the Beatles may have dried up by the early 80s, like the Stones did, but they would still be touring and they'd still be singing, you know, I Want to Hold Your Hand or whatever, into the present, and embarrassing themselves and being really lame and being mere shadows of their former selves. So I think it's a great thing that the Beatles broke up in 1970, and more importantly, that they stayed broken up. I can't think of another major British band that broke up and stayed broken up, you know, that never played together again. You know, Led Zeppelin broke up and they got back together. The Who, I guess they broke up. They're always around. Pink Floyd, in some form or other, is touring. So anyway, but thinking about doing this video, I realized there's one post-Beatles album, and it was by Ringo. It had a catchy title, Ringo, and all four Beatles are on that album. It may be the only time they actually were together. I don't know that they were physically together in a studio playing this album, but they all appear on Ringo's album, which came out in 1973. The one little thing that I'm not so sure about is Paul McCartney isn't listed as Paul McCartney. He's listed as Paul McCartney, lacking the T in McCartney, but I'm pretty sure it's Paul. And he wrote 2 songs. George Harrison is all over the record. John Lennon does the first song on the album, which is I'm the Greatest, which is amazing, which again sounds like a Beatles song. So there was one sort of reunion post-Beatles in 1973. And if I'm missing something there, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. You know, what ifs are just sort of an exercise. You know, the Beatles broke up, and I'm glad they did. The Stones didn't break up, and I'm kind of sad that they didn't, because they've been making really kind of lame records. I mean, it's sad. Anyway, enough of me, enough of my thoughts. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.